Nothing from history are condemned to repeat it. This we are doing in the Americas today. I am sorry to say that all is not well in so-called prosperous, wealthy, and powerful America. We have moved a long way and are now moving further and more rapidly down the soul-destroying road of socialism. The evidence is clear, shockingly clear, for all to see. With our national prestige at or near an embarrassing all-time low, we continue to weaken our domestic economy by unsound fiscal, economic, and foreign aid policies which corrupt our national currency. With the crass, unconstitutional usurpation of power by the executive branch of the federal government, anti-spiritual decisions of the Supreme Court, all apparently approved by a weakly submissive rubber-stamped Congress, the days ahead are ominously frightening. Why is it that men in high places in government, regardless of party, have been deceived? I am convinced that a major part of the cause can be justly laid at the door of the socialist conspiracy, which is led by masters of deceit who deceive the very elect. The things which are destroying the Constitution are the things they have been voting for. They are afraid of their political careers if these facts are pointed out. I think it is time for every patriotic American to join with neighbors to study the Constitution and the conspiracy. Subscribe to several good patriotic magazines, buy a few basic books, and then prepare to do some independent thinking.
Well, first of all, you have to get the economy rolling again. When I was Speaker, we followed policies of lower taxes, less regulation, more American energy. The result was we created about 11 million new jobs in the 4 years I was Speaker. When you have that momentum of job creation, virtually everybody who's willing to work can get a job. Second, I propose that we attach to unemployment compensation a training component so that somebody who does find themselves out of work has help getting trained so that they can get a more modern job. We have literally millions of jobs that are unfilled right now because we don't have the people who can do them. And we have millions of people who would love to have a job, but they don't have the right training. So a program that tied unemployment compensation into job training would also help a number of people who might have had a terrific skill 25 years ago. But as technology's changed, the economy's changed, they need to acquire
16 million people without work or have stopped looking for work. We've got home values continuing to decline, record levels of foreclosure. The president said if we let him borrow $787 billion, he'd keep unemployment below 8%. We're now in the third year with unemployment above 8%. The economy is the issue people are concerned about, and that's where I've spent my time. I've had a real job in the real economy. I want to bring those
1,000 jobs. How and where would you make that happen?
Well, it's throughout the entire economy. What government does, it either makes it easier for entrepreneurs and employers to grow and hire people, or it makes it harder. So here's what I do. Number one, bring down our corporate and employer tax rates to be competitive with the world. Number two, make our regulatory and bureaucratic burden lower so that we're in a more attractive place to invest. Number three, adjust our trade policies so that trade is favorable to the U.S., not just to the people who sell goods here. Number four, make sure that we become energy independent. Sending $500 billion outside of our economy makes no sense at all. Number five, get our schools to be world class. Number six, get the federal government to stop spending more money than it takes in. That kills the value long term of our dollar. People won't invest and create jobs if they think the dollar won't be worth anything down the road. That's the kind of model we have to have to get back to work. And by the way, I spent my life in the private sector, 25 years. I know how we compete globally. I know when we're losing, and right now, this president has put us on a road of economic decline.
But the biggest problem with poverty in America, we don't talk about here because it's an economic discussion, and that is the breakdown of the American family. You want to look at the poverty rate among families that have a husband and wife working in them? It's 5% today. A family that's headed by one person, it's 30% today. We need to do something. We need to talk about economics. The home. The word home in Greek is the basis of the word economy. It is the foundation of our country. We need to have a policy that supports families, that encourages marriage, that has fathers take responsibility for their children. You can't have limited government. You can't have a wealthy society if the family breaks down that basic unit of society, and that needs to be included in this economic.
All right, I've got one last.
We had to get a plan together to revitalize manufacturing. So I took the corporate tax, not the 12%. I zeroed it out for all manufacturers. We want manufacturing. We want Made in the USA to be the moniker under my administration. We want to put a platform together that's going to repeal regulations that are crushing our manufacturers and businesses.
You have to get rid of the recession, and you can't get rid of the recession unless you know where it came from. And the financial bubbles, when they burst, they give you recessions or depression, and we're on the verge of being in a depression for the people who aren't working. Even the young people aren't getting jobs either. So, and this is where I think there's a lot of lack of understanding, because the business cycle comes from the Federal Reserve creating credit, causing interest rates to be lower than they should, and then investors doing the wrong thing, and this creates malinvestment and too much debt. And then when it gets out of whack, the markets send a message and say, you can't sustain this much debt because you built too many houses, you borrowed too much money, you built too much of these things. So the correction has to come in, and the worst thing you can do is to prevent the correction from happening in just propping up bad debt, and that's what we did in 08. There was a lot of bad debt. So the people who were benefiting by the bubble got bailed out, and they dumped the derivatives and the debt onto the people. Then they ended up losing their jobs and losing their houses, and now we're in the midst of this. So if we don't understand that, we don't understand why we have to have less government propping up of the economy. We want to allow these corrections to occur. And of course, this is the reason I think spending is the big problem, and why I advise that you do a lot of cutting. And I believe you can't have a quick recovery unless you understand that. And I have advocated that you get rid of departments as well as cutting spending up to $1 trillion in the first year.
When you talk about these corrections. There is no good option to disarm Iran.
Yes,
the Bush administration knew that. This administration knows that. Tell me what you would do differently then.
I put forth a 5-point plan that said fund the pro-democracy movement, use covert activity to disrupt
Which is already being done, Senator. You know that. There's covert activity to set back their program by the Israelis, by the United States.
Well, we know by the Israelis. We don't have any evidence. If you look at what's being done, most of the evidence actually trails back to the Israelis and the methodologies that they use. There's no evidence the United States is at all complicit in working at that. That's what I would be very direct that we would, in fact, and openly talk about this. Why? Because I want to make sure that Iran knows that when I say that Iran is not getting a nuclear weapon, that we will actually effectuate policies that make that happen. This president has not done that. He has opposed tough sanctions on Iran, on their oil program. Why? Because he's concerned about the economy and his reelection instead of the long-term national security interests of this country. I would say to every foreign scientist that's going into Iran to help them with their program, you will be treated as an enemy combatant, like an al-Qaeda member. And then finally, I would be working openly with the state of Israel, and I would be saying to the Iranians, you either open up those facilities, you begin to dismantle them and make them available to inspectors, or we will degrade those facilities through airstrikes and make it very public that we are doing that. The president has done
So you would lay out a red line, and if they passed it, airstrikes by President Santorum.
Iran will not get a nuclear weapon under my watch.
Well,
I mean, you can't go out and say, this is the problem with this administration. You can't go out and say, this is what I'm for, and then do nothing. You become a paper tiger, and people don't respect our country, and our allies can't trust us.
Because the Israelis are not going to tolerate an Iranian nuclear weapon. I mean,
if the Israelis told you in advance, would you say go ahead and do it?
If they told me in advance, I would say, how can we help you?
You would actually participate in that?
I would provide them intelligence. I'd provide them logistics support. Look, and this is a line we have to draw. I mean, an Iranian nuclear weapon is potentially a second Holocaust. Israel's a very urban country. 2 or 3 nuclear weapons wipes out most of the Jews who live in Israel. I believe Ahmadinejad would do it in a heartbeat. I mean, when you have people who put on bodysuits to walk into a crowded mall to blow themselves up, you better believe they'd put on a nuclear weapon. So I think the world needs to understand Iran is not going to get a nuclear weapon. All the world can decide is whether they help us peacefully stop it or they force us to use violence. But Iran is not going to get a nuclear weapon. The presidency will not tolerate 4 more years of this dictatorship.
Overt and covert, are you talking about engaging the U.S. military?
No, I'm talking about using every asset available in the United States, including appropriate covert operations, to maximize the distance. What Ronald Reagan, Pope John Paul II, and Margaret Thatcher did to the Soviet Empire. Bring together every asset we have to minimize the survival of the dictatorship and to maximize the chance for freedom in Cuba.
Congressman?
I have a little bit of work to do yet on him on foreign policy. Now, I would do pretty much the opposite. I don't like the isolationism of not talking to people. I was drafted in 1962 at the height of the Cold War when the missiles were in Cuba. And the Cold War is over. And I think we propped up Castro for 40-some years because we put on these sanctions, and this only used us as a scapegoat. He could always say anything wrong is the United States' fault. But I think it's time to quit this isolation business of not talking to people. We talk to the
South Carolina has 7 major military bases and thousands of people employed in the defense industry. But you want to make major cuts in defense spending, several $100 billion in the coming years, that inevitably would cost South Carolina jobs.